on this episode of A Tale of Two Hygienists.
There's just this notion that like if I'm putting in the right water, then it's going to be okay, without considering the fact that the unit itself isn't sterile. So it's actually an engineering problem with the unit itself. So it doesn't matter if it's necessarily coming from the city or tap or distilled or sterile or whatever system you're using prior to putting it into the unit. The moment it enters the unit, it's a whole different ballgame. It's unfortunately now kind of your responsibility to help alleviate those feelings and frustrations and concerns, and that revolves around you being transparent about your infection control and saying, hey, here's how we sterilize your instruments prior to using them on you. Here's, how we sterilize the room. Here's how we, here's how we do waterline maintenance. Here are some of the things that let us show you that we're really trying to create an environment that you're going to feel safe and cared for when you're here with us.
Yeah, this is a tale, oh yeah, a tale of two hygienists. So there might be only one, bringing the best of dental knowledge, and we do it all with ease. We cover oral health and screening, and preventing gum disease. We're gonna do a lot of learning, and have a little bit of fun working at the dentist. A tale of two hygienists.
Welcome everyone into this special bonus episode this weekend. We have a great guest for you today. We're joined today by Andrew from a company called ProEdge Dental Water Labs. The most of you probably know them as ProEdge. Simply put, ProEdge is a leader in testing and treating the water that we use for basically everything in dentistry. And Andrew is a fun, engaging, knowledgeable. He was pulling out stats and quotes and studies. He's so much fun. He makes this topic come to life. There were a ton of takeaways from the episode. I think the one that I'm hoping that you'll come away with the most is, and again, this happened again this week on social media where, someone was asking a question and it was the masses of the internet are the ones that are responding. One of the takeaways I'm hoping for you all for this one is that instead of turning to social media or instead of asking your coworker what their opinion is on something, that when you have a question about Waterline products, you lean heavily upon the experts at ProEdge. Their support team is responsible for knowing like every single product from every company that you're going to be using on your dental unit's Waterline, and they'll help you use those products better and safer. They're not just singularly responsible for their own products, but they know all of them in the industry. And in my opinion, you should use just their products, but that's very unlikely to happen. So again, don't be afraid to ask for their help no matter what you're using. Another thing for me though, and I think that you're going to find this with Andrew and how you're going to connect with him, at this stage of my life, I'm finding that I want to work with companies more and more who are doing the right thing. But even more than that, they're going above and beyond without any expectations. And so having a support team like that is just there to help is huge and different and unique in this business. And so ProEdge is really one of the companies that I like working with. Annie and I had a great time on this episode. Thank you for joining us. And thank you again to ProEdge for their partnership. Enjoy this episode, everyone.
A tale of two hygienists.
All right, listeners, welcome into the interview portion of the podcast. We're joined today by Andrew from ProEdge Dental Water Labs. Andrew, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm super stoked to be on.
Now, this is going to be great. You did a great tip episode for us not too long ago. Listeners, if you haven't listened to that yet, I'm going to link back to that in the show notes. So make sure you go back and listen to that one. But I'll just say, listeners, if you're wondering why he sounds so good, this is a former podcaster. I'm geeking out. Poor Annie's just like Andrew, shut up.
No, this is great. This is great.
Oh my gosh,
It's
this
good.
is awesome.
It's good.
So we're talking about waterline safety, just trying to keep our patients as safe as possible. And I wanted to open up the conversation today with kind of some thoughts about this article I read. I believe it was on your website. If it's not on your website, I'm going to still give you guys the credit. And I apologize if it wasn't. But it was about retrofitting our dental offices.
Yeah.
Essentially, you have some offices that are still getting city water piped in. And then I've never experienced that a day in my life. I've always had individual water bottles for each of the operatories, for each of the units. So I guess my question was for you, is that still even a topic that we need to be having, a conversation we need to be having? Do people still have city water piped in?
I didn't even know people were using it. That's news to me. So anyway, yes,
Yeah.
please share.
Yeah, it's definitely so. I think a lot of new offices are opening up with water bottle systems, and that's great. That's what we want to see. I think some of the older offices are still plumbed, and I think the problem that lies with going direct to the city is you really can't create a protocol that's effective. One of the things that we highly recommend is that you shock your water lines, right? And shocking is a huge critical component of this whole process because it's like the more aggressive chemical solution that can actually kill and remove that biofilm that potentially builds up over time. And you cannot do that if you're plumbed direct. And so, yeah, we recommend that you get like a retrofit kit. They cost you a couple $100 per operatory, but that gets you what you need to have a bottle system. And so we recommend that every time.
Well, so you're saying the city's not going to shock your water lines for you?
No.
They're not going to just go ahead and do that for you? Huh, that's interesting. But the price point on a retrofit doesn't sound like that's that cost prohibitive.
Yeah, it's not too bad. It's not too bad.
Are we seeing that? I mean, is there an incidence level of that this should be a concern? I mean, I understand like we want to be very cautious and do everything that we can to prevent. But are we seeing that like city water lines are not good?
No. So here's the interesting thing I think about how we think about water as it goes into the unit. Because I think there's actually this is a great question because it leads to a parallel question which has to do with distilled water and still water. There's just this notion that like if I'm putting in the right water, then it's going to be okay without considering the fact that the unit itself isn't sterile. So it's actually an engineering problem with the unit itself. So it doesn't matter if it's necessarily coming from the city or tap or distilled or sterile or whatever system you're using prior to putting it into the unit. The moment it enters the unit, it's a whole different ball game. And I think oftentimes dental professionals think so much about the type of water we're putting into the unit rather than what we're actually doing when it is in the unit. And that's, I think, where we want to focus the conversation. And of course, going back to what we said about city, yeah, it's a challenge if you're getting plumbed direct because you really can't do anything about it. Once it's in the unit, once it's in the dental unit, there's no shocking. It's hard to treat. There's just a lot of complications there.
Okay, so I didn't really think about the unit itself. Like you said, we focus so much about what's in our water, what water we're using, and how we're treating it and shocking it and all that, but it's the unit itself. And so can we talk about that a little bit more as far as like how units differ or how we should be treating the water based on the unit?
Yeah. Every dental unit manufacturer does have recommendations. We, of course, have kind of a generic protocol. We say shock, treat, test, but then the dental unit manufacturer will have kind of their own preliminary recommendations to that. I think that, so there's some fascinating studies that have already been done on this, right? So one of them is the Barbeau study where they looked at brand new dental chairs and they looked at brand new water lines and they actually put sterile water in there and they used it for 5 days and then they tested the water afterwards. And they saw that once it entered the dental unit, I mean, it's a completely different ecosystem. And so you look at that and they looked at the results and the colony forming unit count, CFU, which is kind of how we measure a baseline there. It was in like the hundreds of thousands of colony forming units, which is, I can't even do the math on that. I mean, that's thousands of times more than what the EPA is recommending for safe water. And so I think the biggest thing is like, yeah, once it gets into the unit, it becomes just an engineering problem. You have these porous water lines that are just phenomenal for bacteria just to kind of nestle in and start to protect themselves with the biofilm matrix. You have really low flow. You have stagnation. I mean, the water lines themselves, like the diameter is so tiny and it's moist to top that all off. It's a wet environment. So you do have this unbelievably conducive space for bacteria and biofilm just to flourish in there. And so it really does not matter too much the water that you're bringing in. Obviously, like disclaimer, if you're pumping hundreds of thousands of bacteria into, yeah, you're going to have a problem. But generally speaking, if the water's already good, whether it's tap or distilled or sterile, the problem really lies once it's in the unit itself.
Yeah. Well, I think kind of a parallel like thought along that, and we all do, is like anything inside the pouches before we open it up is sterile, right? Once we open it up, it's now like potential for contamination.
Yeah.
It's a similar thing. Like our brains should be able to process that very well, but you're right, we don't process that very well either way. All right, so listening to you, like you're citing studies, like I can tell you love this stuff. let's talk about the office level though. Are you finding that there's like one particular team member, whether it's a hygienist, assistant, front office, whoever, that has that same level of passion? Like, is it dentists are more concerned about this, hygienists? Like,
yeah. So I'll speak in generalities. I would say the dentist is usually focused on the cost, right? It's a business expense for them, and that's why they're trying to run a business, and so there's usually a cost factor associated with that. I think dental hygienists, once they're educated on this, they are very, very passionate about seeing a change happen at their operatory. It's really, really transformative, and so because it's not usually malintent, it's not usually like, oh, I'm intentionally not going to do this. It really is kind of like a lack of education or clarity surrounding what needs to happen. And once it's like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that this is happening in my chair, every single day. I'm fighting up against bacteria and biofilm that are stubborn and wanting to grow and wanting to take over. Okay, let's do something about that. So usually the dental hygienist, once they understand kind of what's going on behind the scenes and the veil's been torn back, so to speak, they get really passionate about elevating the safety and level of care for their office. And then typically the individuals that are responsible for carrying that out, we see, actually it's 99% is the dental assistant. So 99% of the time, the dental assistant is actually the one that will implement and do waterline maintenance routinely for an office.
Oh, interesting.
I think hygienists can so relate because we live in this world of biofilm, and we talk about biofilm so much in the mouth, and so there's just so much, and we're prevention experts, and so I think, like you said, once you kind of pull the curtains back a little bit, hygienists want to become so involved, and although may not necessarily during the day be able to take on that responsibility, but I think we do want to be an advocate for it.
Totally. Yeah.
Well, Annie, I want to ask you this question because you've worked in offices that probably had a point person. Have you ever seen a hygienist be a point person for the office? Doing the straws or any of the maintenance or putting in the log, anything like that?
I've worked in various settings between public health and private practice, and in all those different settings, it's usually been an assistant, a point person, the infection control monitor, whatever you want to call it, even just that communicates with OSHA and different things. It's always that person that's on the logbook, and I really haven't seen a hygienist in that role. And I'm just wondering if that's because of the traditional hygiene schedule, if it just doesn't allow for a hygienist to take on that. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, but fighting for all the assistants out there, the assistants are just 100%. As busy as hygienists. But totally. However,
the routine of the schedule.
It's interesting, and I find this, and Andrew, you can disagree if you feel like jumping in and starting into this fight, but I find it interesting that I feel like hygienists really are a lot more passionate about, because we do biofilm, because we have that kind of infection control background to a different degree. And then the assistants are the ones carrying out the tasks. I almost feel like they're doing it just as a kind of a checklist. We're doing the thing that we're supposed to be doing.
Right.
And I don't want to say they don't care about it, but I don't think that they're passionate about it.
And understanding the why behind it.
And it's just so interesting that we have two groups. Like, I wish we saw more overlap, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I wish hygienists could be and should be more in charge of this task, because it's so important, and it's their units, it's their patients. They have ownership of the patients in a way that maybe the assistants don't necessarily have to have, which, again, depends on the office. But the doctors can't, definitely don't have the time or the attention for all of this. I do actually, Andrew, want to come back to something you did mention about costs later. So I'd love to ask you if you could help us with conversations with our doctors, because that is a weak point.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, though, I want to talk a little bit more about how do I say this nice? Like, I think like the big picture about why the testing part of, like, because I don't think that we'll change out our straws, we'll change out our this, we'll do these things, but the testing part doesn't necessarily seem like it is a part of the process necessarily. Why does it feel? In your opinion, like it's just optional for so many offices?
Yeah. And so I liken this oftentimes to biological monitoring, right? Where I think the industry is a little bit more caught up with right, putting in your sterilizers, putting in your pouches, using your cassettes, and actually testing to see if the sterilizer's doing what it's supposed to. And it's a similar concept, right? We put a lot of time and effort into treating our water, right? To your point, there's straws, there's tablets, there's shock products out there, and we're doing those things. And wouldn't it be nice to know if it's actually doing the thing that we expect that it's doing? And oftentimes what's fascinating, and we look at the Molinari study with this, is it's not doing the thing that we think it's doing, right? A third of tested water lines still fail, and they're being treated. They're being treated by a variety of different products. So we go in with the assumption that, hey, this is working, but we never put the testing behind it to ensure that that's actually happening. I think it's optional for a couple of different reasons. For me, it really comes down to regulation. There's not a lot of clarity around what we should be doing and why we should be doing it. If I could shout out to Dr. Karsten, he really put together a phenomenal team to help develop the protocol in Washington. And I think we point to that as kind of the pinnacle of what this should be, of just like, hey, the CDC is not super clear around how we should be doing this. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to drive that clarity for dental professionals so that they know. And again, it's not usually malintent. It's not like the doctor or the hygienist is like, I'm just not going to do this. That's not typically what we see. It's usually like once they know, once they've been educated, it's like, okay, yeah, I get it. But now what do I do? And that question alone is usually so convoluted with so many different things, right? It's like they get into the world of like, okay, what am I going to do now? And the options feel endless. The suggestions feel endless, right? It's like pooled sample, individual sample, this test, that test. And it's just like really confusing. And if you're really busy, which most are, yeah, it's just time away from things that you want to really focus your time and energy on. And so I think if there were clearer regulations, that would be helpful, because I think that clarity drives more immediate action than feeling like you're just caught up in this whirlwind of like, well, what's right? What am I supposed to be doing? And trying to sift through some of the marketing that's out there and try to find a real clear solution for your own office. And so, yeah, usually it's not malintent. Usually it is just like they just don't know. And once they know, it's how can we drive that clarity home so it's really easy for them to adopt that?
It's almost like needing universal precautions for infection control. Like it's like you said, the lack of for sure. But the lack of regulation and just getting an understanding of, like you said, like how to implement or the steps to take and the time to do it. And because I think about even in dental hygiene school, we like drive home so much about biological monitoring and all of these processes, and then we get into practice. And then when I worked in public health and for a federally qualified health center, it was much more regimented because it fell under medical. And so we followed a lot of the protocols of medical, but then working in like a smaller practice setting, some of those things change. Yeah, totally. It's actually interesting you say that because, when we look at CHCs and other dental settings that are more regulated, they're killing it. I mean, they are really buttoned up and they're doing the things that they're supposed to be doing. And I think more in the general healthcare setting, that's where you have more discrepancies and there's not that level of clarity. And so in the lack of clarity, I think most people just kind of assume the best and move on without saying, hey, maybe I actually should really look into this and test my water and see how it's coming back and document this whole process. And I think I don't want to say guilty of that, but I've worked in that setting. I'm like, well, I'm, doing, changing out the straws or using tablets, whatever the case may be. I know it's getting shocked occasionally, but like, to be completely transparent, but it's like, this isn't my it is my responsibility, but there's someone else in place that's like, oh yeah, we need to do this periodically. But it's like, was there something regimented? I don't know.
Well, there could also be, though, like you don't want to know the answer, right? Like that, it's not
that
it's
too.
not because,
like bury your head in the sand, kind of. I don't know.
You don't want to be like responsible for like potentially hurting people, but
yes,
also like,
exactly.
But if it does fail, then I have to do all these other steps I just don't have time for. I really don't.
That too, yes.
Annie, I got a question for you again because it's because of the way how you work. So we do like the biological monitoring in school. It's very you're assigning it to the students. It's happening regularly. Do you in this education settings? I don't remember doing that. Are there people that are assigned to waterline maintenance? And is there a logbook for it? Does everyone have the opportunity to experience it once a quarter or whatever the time is?
Yep. At least like where I work, every student has they go through rotations. But yeah, every student is exposed to it. There is a logbook. Everything is very regimented and recorded, and there's strict protocol. But every student has the opportunity to be in that role and have exposure to that.
Okay. So is it like, are they all responsible for their own units kind of a thing? Like as far as like shocking and
I see
and
what you're saying.
You know what I mean? Like I'm not sure like
Yeah.
I'm just not really sure like how much experience you get in school. Is it like one time because you check it off because you did the one seal on the pediatric kid and that's it? Or is it like you have multiple exposures to it?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, well, I know that the students are obviously responsible for changing out their water bottles. And then when it comes to like shocking, every student is responsible for their unit when they do the shocking. And then as far as when it goes to recording it in the logbook, it really comes down to who is ever on the sterile rotation at that time.
See, that's what I was more wondering is like, is it like, okay, someone has, so how does that work for then, and maybe you don't know this and maybe you shouldn't say the answer on a podcast, but who's responsible for the actual testing of it though, to make sure that the processes that are signed off on the logbook are actually accurate and safe?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. It's a good question. We'll put it out there. Maybe all of our educator listeners that are listening in can maybe like chime in and let us know.
I know there's a logbook, but then
goes.
As far as like when it like gets like when the Bible like when it's getting sent out and received back and who is monitoring that, I would imagine it's a faculty member.
But you get clear results back though. I mean, there is a process for
there's a process that shows that reports the results that come back. Yep, there's that logbook, and so and they send it out like. I don't know how often, but I know it's very often that they send it out to get tested.
I just don't recall what it is for Waterlines, like how often that testing gets recorded and where it gets recorded and things like that. Anyway, so that was a different question.
Yeah.
But Andrew, I guess my question for you though, kind of based on what you were saying though, is if we're having so many failures and if it's seeming like these community health centers or the more regimented places are having more success and the private practice maybe are having less success, there has to be like a thing that we're doing wrong in private practice, whether we're just negligent not doing it, we're not doing it correctly. There's too many variables because there's too many, different types of options. Why are we failing these tests more often?
Yeah. I think consistency is a huge factor, right? Like the more you do it, the better you are at it. I think that's just a general rule of life with anything, but specifically with waterline maintenance, I think, right, when it comes to dropping tablets in or changing out the straw when it's supposed to be changed out, just anecdotally, we know that is oftentimes a missed place, right? Maybe a 1-year straw ends up going 2 years. Maybe the tablets get, put into the bottle every other time or every third time. And so there's some opportunity there to button up. But the moment that you test is the moment everything gets put out. It's like, it's exposing. You're absolutely right. Like, there totally is an emotional component to this where it is like kind of showing what is really going on back there. And I think sometimes in a failed test, there's actually an awesome opportunity to kind of reassess how we're doing things. And oftentimes what we'll find is, specifically in the general practice world, is, maybe we aren't putting in the tablets as often as we thought we were, or maybe we're not changing out the straw as often as we should, or maybe we don't have a shock protocol that's as consistent as it should be to be really effective at removing and killing that biofilm and bacteria. So usually it exposes something, and that's uncomfortable. That's probably another reason why I think some people like to see it as optional. It's like, this is an uncomfortable thing to step into, but it's an incredible process because it will make sure you're doing not just the right thing, but the safe thing, and elevating your standard of care for your patients that sit down in your chair. And so, I think with CHCs and other more heavily regulated dental offices, it's consistency, but then they really understand how to remediate. Like it's a failed test. All right, let's figure out, where did we go wrong? How can we button this up in the future? And so their protocols and their SOPs are just a little bit more buttoned up, a little bit more refined, and they understand how to learn from their failure quicker. And that typically leads to a more clarifying process moving forward, so they have less failures moving forward.
A quick plug for DSOs, but the world knows I love DSOs. I think they're most amazing. They also could be complete disasters. But the thing about the places I've worked before, we've always had a health and safety officer at the corporate level, and that person is responsible for putting all these processes in place. So if you're feeling like this change of pace, community health center sounds like a healthy, safe place to work. potentially. And also DSOs are going to probably be a little bit more regulated and regimented as far as the stuff goes. They will have the processes in place. They will have usually in their binder exactly how to remediate, like you were talking about. Like they'll have these things. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so we're not going to be able to get to all of our questions. Can we really quickly have a conversation about getting our doctors to buy in, overcoming the cost, overcoming... I think that we know how important this is. I think there's evidence for days about how important this is, that we need to be having it into our office. But again, we have a barrier sometimes of cost for a dentist.
Yeah. This is such an important conversation. I think even the conversation itself sometimes keeps dental professionals from moving forward in wanting to do waterline maintenance and testing. And I think it's for me, it's a shift in perspective, right? I think maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, you can really focus on your expertise. You can really focus on your craft, really focus on dentistry and ensuring that that's excellent. I think specifically COVID, but I think patients have become hypersensitive to infection control and safety. And I think when anything like Anaheim or any of the Georgia cases or the Virginia cases come to the public eye, that now creates an inherent distrust before a patient even sits down in your chair. And so there's this new approach to dentistry. You have to market your infection control now, because you're going up against this initial mistrust or distrust. People are coming in skeptical. They're coming in cynical. They're coming in potentially knowing some of these things that have unfolded in dentistry at large. And it's unfortunately now kind of your responsibility to help alleviate those feelings and frustrations and concerns. And that revolves around you being transparent about your infection control and saying, hey, here's how we sterilize your instruments prior to using them on you. Here's, how we sterilize the room. Here's how we do waterline maintenance. Here are some of the things that let us show you that we're really trying to create an environment that you're going to feel safe and cared for when you're here with us. And that is now the new dentistry. It's not just practicing dentistry. It is now marketing safety and an overall patient experience where they feel really like I can trust this person and I know they have my best interest in mind.
Smart.
Yeah, that's so great. And if any hygienist is listening to this right now and is feeling really motivated and wants to take that step and really kind of take action in their office, whether it be talking with their dentist or just changing their protocols, where can they go, or how can ProEdge support them? Give us some insight on that.
Yeah. I really, truly believe this is where we're unique in the space, and you can put us to the test. You can call our customer success team and we'll recommend products that we don't have, like that aren't our products. I mean, if you're using a product and you're wanting to know how to use it effectively, we will teach you how to use that product effectively. We're not going to try to upsell or cross-sell or whatever. We genuinely want you to be successful. And our customer delight team, our customer success team, they are phenomenal at that. Every customer success team member on our team has to be trained on every single product IFUs across the board in the waterline maintenance category. And so when you call in and you're saying, hey, I'm using XYZ product, we know exactly how to be really effective at implementing that into a wider system, which is the shock, treat, test system, and doing that really well. So yeah, I'd say reach out, really seriously test us. You can reach us with our number, 888-843-3343, or just email us at support@proedgedental.com. We genuinely want to see you be successful, and we'll customize a protocol around what you're currently using or introduce potential solutions that maybe you're not aware of that will help drive success.
Awesome. We'll make sure that contact information gets in the show notes, but thank you so much for all of your insight and providing guidance for dental professionals and just being really positive and motivated for making changes in the dental operatory.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, this is a tale, oh yeah, a tale of two hygienists. Though there might be only one, bringing the best of dental knowledge, and we do it all with ease. We cover oral health and screening, and preventing gum disease. We're gonna do a lot of learning, and have a little bit of fun working at the dentist. A tale of two hygienists.